So we are back today and we are joined by two fabulous guests, Jim Gabriel and David Saab. But before introducing them properly, I'm just going to start by setting the scene a little bit because some of you may have joined Amantha and I before when we have been talking about the Resilience Collective. And that's all about a series of resources and talks like these, which are about different aspects of mental health. And we are about providing really practical advice and strategies for people to use in their personal lives and at work to help address and get rid of the elephant in the room and improve mental health and well-being. So I'm Lisa Lloyd. I'm a psychologist, psychotherapist, and founder of It's Time for Change. And I basically work with companies to help them become places where people are able to feel really good, feel healthy, and to perform really well. And Amantha, who I'm working really closely with on this project, we're developing this stuff together. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. So my name is Amantha King. I'm a workplace menopause consultant. So I'm all about making sure that women stay in work, they don't step down, step back or step out, to help businesses be profitable and productive. And my other hat that I wear is I'm an executive performance coach. So it's all about helping people be the best versions of themselves in and out of work.
Fab. And so I want to hear a little bit from Jim and David about, we know what they do, but for everyone else to know what they do and why they're here, and also why they are particularly interested in this topic today when we are discussing anxiety and depression. So we know David Saab from our work with the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. Amantha and I are both on the Mental Wellbeing Steering Group. So David, shall I come over to you first? Do you want to introduce yourself and what it is that keeps you busy?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a business alliance manager at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, which means I account manage the anchor institutions, the larger organisations in membership. So people like Sanofi, GWR, Thames Water, those kind of companies, and help them stay engaged in membership, shall we say, through a number of events, activity. We're a business support group. So Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, not for profit. And my other hat is a mental wellbeing champion. So I kind of steer the outward facing mental health work that we try and do along with Lisa and Amantha on our steering group. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, David. And Jim Gabriel is Chief Commercial Officer at CardMedic. So you're someone who has experienced depression as a business leader. So you've got really valuable insight to share with us today. But tell us a little bit more about your role, Jim.
Yeah. So hello, everybody, and thank you for that, Lisa. As Chief Commercial Officer, I'm responsible for the sales, basically, in this new organisation, CardMedic, very young business. And it's my job, basically, to crank the whole sales machine into life and then manage to scale up in our ambitious world domination aspirations. It is a classic high-tech, high-growth startup environment. We've been going for a little bit longer than 3 years, so we're not really startup anymore, but we're definitely early stage. The reason that I'm doing it is because I actually mentored the people at the beginning of this journey when they just literally thought up the idea and got so involved that when they asked me to actually join them, I said, yeah, sure, I'd love to, and jumped over. I've spent my life in startups, so either my own or somebody else's, most of them high tech, not all of them, some of them in construction and other fields, but mainly high tech, mainly software related. It's a sort of a high stakes game, really, really exciting because you can grow things very rapidly and achieve most amazing successes. But you can also have most amazing profits in that journey. At startup stage, there's so much out there that will take you out, take you down, knock you sideways. That it is a particular kind of ride that's not for everybody. The reason that I'm still doing it is because I do absolutely love that thing of getting something going from absolute nothing. But I have learned that it is not for everybody for a lot of reasons to do with mental health. I mean, it's a high stakes in anxiety and in depression and in risk and in fear and in threat to to personal circumstances and all sorts of things. And I find it particularly shocking as I've become educated about this space because of my own clinical depression. How high a proportion of founders of businesses take their own lives, and it's sort of really quite shocking, very, very upsetting. And having been in that position a lot, where you have a sort of a parental responsibility for the people around you, you tend to pay yourself last, you tend to go to bed last, you tend to log off last, you've always got your glass so full it's overflowing, let alone half full. And it's made me keenly aware that the people I work with and have worked with most of my career have been the most high risk of all. And so I do care passionately about that. And I think that it's not all about the money, and it's not all about the success, not all about the glitz. It's about your well-being. So that's why I'm here. Anyway,
I think it's a really interesting point, Jim, about you tend to look after yourself last, and you spend your time looking after other people, because we put so much pressure, don't we, on managers to get things right for their teams and to look after their teams better, and leaders to get everything right in terms of setting the right culture for people to be able to thrive. But actually, it's really easy to forget that they are humans and they have their own capacity and capability, and sometimes we just end up putting more and more on them without giving them the adequate support they need. Like, who's looking after those people?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a very powerful point. Well, I think quite often you don't know what you don't know, do you? I mean, in my case, I am rather long in the tooth, and I discovered that and I had to look up the actual definition of it. Effectively, what it meant, I was so depressed I couldn't function on pretty much any level. So that's socially, personally, professionally, whatever. In these mild words that got written in a clinical report when I was nearly 60, and so I went into therapy and learned a huge amount. And this is one of the reasons that I trained to be a mental health first aider. And again, why I'm sitting here today, because my whole life has changed. I've never been depressed before, as far as I know, and I learned a whole new vocabulary towards the sort of twilight years of my life. And I think I've been so better able to be the best version of me if I'd learned all this stuff as a child or as a teenager or as at school or whatever. And I think things are changing. We're getting to the point now where it's acceptable to talk about mental health in a way that just wasn't not that long ago. In fact, it's still not really acceptable in a lot of circles. But it's getting increasingly easier to talk about, and companies are training up mental health first aiders and beginning to pay more than just lip service to it. But I still don't think it's anywhere near enough. And you still keep hitting that kind of that wall where people say, just have a cup of tea, stiff upper lip, go back in, do it again.
Well, there's a CIPD report earlier this year, which showed that workplace absences are at the highest level in over 10 years.
Yeah.
And mental health issues were the cause of 63% of extended absences from work. So despite the fact that there has been such an emphasis on let's have mental health first aiders and let's all talk about mental health and let's have all these webinars, all this training and stuff, the trend still seems to be going in the wrong direction. There was data from a study in Q3 of 2022-23, antidepressants were the most prescribed class of drugs. So we're still seem to be going in the wrong direction, and it's like, at what point do we put the brakes on and say what fundamentally is going wrong? Don't know, what are your thoughts, David or Amantha?
Well, I would say definitely just hearing Jim speak there. I mean, I think that's just so many questions that I would have around that straight away, which is like we've put that timeline in place, haven't we, from childhood to where we are all now. are we doing enough when we onboard people into businesses? Are we doing enough when we are managers? Do we actually calibrate? That's the word I thought. I must say that word when we come on to today. Calibrate. Do you know your people well enough to know what a good day looks like for them, or what their worst day looks like for them? How can you sit in front of someone and calibrate them if you spend in total less than an hour with them in any financial year? So I always use the wonderful animal that is an octopus when we talk about things like mental health, because it's not just one tentacle, is it? It's 8 probably, and these things cross over so much. So I would definitely want to hear even more, if it was okay, from Jim and David, because I think that's what helps us understand at which point can we make a difference to an individual, by hearing real life stories and how people are navigating it on a day-to-day. Because I bet, Jim, those words that were written on that piece of paper, how did anyone have any idea, including yourself, that that's where you were at?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, the words were moderately depressed, and I think that was an interesting thing, really, because the 3 stages of depression that we talk about are mild, moderate, and acute. And acute's where you're topping yourself and a risk, and you're psychotic, and people are out there on suicide watch and so on. Mild is basically anxiety, the kind that level of very common mental health issues that most of us are going to be experiencing quite a lot. And moderate is such a funny word, isn't it? I mean, moderate feels to me like it's all right, you put up with that. But actually, when it was my solicitor who said, how are you going to respond to this? And actually knew what it meant more than I did. So I went and looked it all up, and then discovered that technically it meant I couldn't function. And that was a huge wake up call. But I've been to university, and I spent my life learning endlessly, because that's what happens in startup land. Most people who do constant jumping, serial entrepreneur type stuff, is because they get bored very quickly, and the moment something gets operational, they had enough of that, they move on and do something else, and so you're constantly learning, and that's part of the buzz of it. So you think that, why did I not learn that stuff in all that other stuff? And it's just not out there. It's not taught to people, and I'm not beating anybody else up about this, and I'm not looking for somebody to blame, but it does make me wonder that I should have been equipped with that understanding much earlier.
And you wonder where that's supposed to come from, in terms of, I mean, you mentioned earlier on about, from almost being like school age, like where do people get educated in this stuff? And it's, whether you're at school, because school is supposed to be about educating a whole person, not just, literacy and numeracy and so on. And you then go into jobs, and is it a responsibility of every employer to go through that induction process? I would argue yes, but that's going to be very hit and miss depending on the quality of that and whether that's even available. But there is a massive gap, isn't there? Because you said you were much later on in life when you suddenly got this diagnosis.
Yes, there's definitely a gap. I mean, I think in the States, where everybody has a therapist, or you're a nobody kind of thing, which is not meant as a joke. It's just so normal to have somebody to be bouncing off. And you learn these things very early on, and it's not like a status thing or a box one has to tick. You learn the language of it. So I find talking to Americans about mental health much easier than talking to English people, because it's just taken for granted that you kind of need to see people, to whatever, defuse, figure out what's making you tick, and so you learn the language of depression or other mental health.
Can I ask, Jim, how you felt in yourself? So obviously you're very competent and educated and successful in your world of work. How did it feel when you got this diagnosis and you realize that you're as vulnerable as the next person in terms of it's happened to you?
Well, I was actually really relieved. I I was experiencing something that I now know to be a fairly classic symptom of depression, where I couldn't face doing any of the admin in my business anymore. So I was watching the posts stack up, and I had two drop dead deadlines that I needed to worry about that kept coming around on a rolling basis. One was the time where I needed to pay the bills and pay the salaries and stuff every month, and the other one was the VAT return once every 3 months, and they just used to completely freak me out. And I was watching piles of posts build up, and then usually on a rainy Sunday afternoon, I would just go and steel myself and wade through. And it was always a pointless fear, because in that particular business, actually a small niche construction business. And it's quite easy to lose money in any business, and just as easy to lose money in a construction business. And the margins are fairly small, and the competition's huge, and so on. But there's a fairly basic set of rules that you've got to stick to keep the business afloat. So it's not rocket science. It's not a hugely risky brand new software organization or whatever. It's fairly straightforward. And we weren't losing money, and we were able to pay our bills. And I had absolutely zero reason to worry. So I couldn't understand why I was getting so freaked out by it. And my personal life that was meshing in with all of this was being badly affected by the fact that I'd lost the sight of my eye, and that was a retinal detachment that went misdiagnosed. And reference to earlier to my solicitor was that I decided to sue the person who misdiagnosed me, because it was a schoolboy rookie textbook error. Clear as a bell, my retina was detaching, and this guy had a look in my eye and said, "You're fine," and gave me a new glasses prescription. And so when my retina fell off completely, my life changed. So I could no longer cycle in a peloton because it was just too dangerous. I couldn't use tools. I'm in a construction business. I can't use tools. And I found even reading sheet music at a piano difficult, because if I had to go too far up the keyboard, I couldn't be sure that my fingers were going to hit the right point, because my eyes were telling me the wrong thing. Punching cupboards with my fist every day. I had to sell my motorbike, which I'm sure my family thought was a very good idea anyway. But my life basically changed. And so I learned much later, having gone into therapy, that I was experiencing grief, and that you can experience grief about anything that you lose. I guess that's a huge learning for me. I thought you grieved human beings who died, or pets or whatever, but the loss of something, the fundamental change in your life or something, can cause you to grieve, and the symptoms of grief and depression are almost identical. And the first job of a therapist, as my therapist explained to me, was to figure out whether I was grieving or depressed, or both, and what the connection might be. And pretty quickly came to the conclusion that I had every right to grieve. At the same time, we just discovered that my wife, who had gone through breast cancer ages ago, 2008, had been diagnosed with secondaries in her lungs, and so I was grieving probably for that as well. And I still didn't think, I couldn't understand why am I so scared of the money in this business, because I sold a software business comfortably. I'm not burdened by the kind of cares that would make me need to worry about money. I've got savings, I've got no mortgage, I've got, I really, really, really didn't understand it. And then what this lovely therapist did was take me on a journey which got me a year later to the point where she connected the dots, or I connected the dots with her help. And I had deep, deep, deep rooted issues from my childhood that were being dragged into play by my well-being, or lack thereof, at that particular point in my life. And I'm so grateful that I got taken on that journey, because I now know so much more about myself, my background, my family, what makes me tick, the things I need to watch out for, the spaces I don't want to go into. But what it gave me most fundamentally was the awareness that every single human being on this planet has that same existence. They've had their experiences, they're carrying the baggage, and it's in most cases buried. But when that gets triggered somehow, snagged up into life somehow, then your world falls apart. And if anybody goes on the same kind of journey as I did, I know that's going to take them a long time to get to the bottom of that. And so much of what happened to me might have been easier if I'd learned the vocabulary a lot earlier, or had people who cared about that kind of thing earlier. In fact, back in my childhood, when the traumatizing events were all happening, I was actually at a very Spartan, cruel boarding school, which had its own litany of cruel events going on as well. So it was all about barrier, and protection, and bury, and so I think society's moved on a bit. But hopefully, boarding schools are less cruel and fewer people go to them, and we're able to talk about the things that could lead longer term into big depressions. But I don't think we're there yet, actually. But I think I see an upward line there.
It's fascinating hearing your story, Jim. I mean, you've packed so much in there. I know I've heard it when we've spoken before, but what you're saying, I mean, there's just so much that you've experienced. And I think your point about everyone has their backstory, everyone has this experience, and they might be aware of it, they might not. They might be coming into work knowing that they're struggling with stuff, or not knowing, but something could unexpectedly trigger it in the workplace and catch them off guard. And whether that's a particular voice or a particular look of someone or a particular room, or, I mean, it could be anything that could be a trigger, and we don't know what that is. I don't think that's, when people keep that as kind of hidden knowledge, because either they don't know it themselves, or that actually they don't feel they can talk about it and say, I really struggle with this particular situation, or when I'm in that context, that's a real trigger for me. Triggers are, understanding workplace triggers, I think, are really, really important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just ask David, because I mean, you come into you see so many different businesses, like you say, as an alliance manager, and I'm always observing people, and when we hear stories like Jim's, and first of all, Jim, thank you so much for sharing, because your vulnerability may just be the door opening moment for someone watching this that says, actually, that feels like me, actually. Or I resonate with what you're saying, or you're validating their experience in some way, shape, or form. So I know you tell your story, and it's the first time I've heard it, and it takes courage to do that. But David, from your perspective, I mean, how do we not know stories like that are walking through the door every day in the workplace? How do we not know that, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, Jim, lovely to meet you on here, and really refreshing to hear you so open about what you've experienced, without going into too much detail. About 17 years ago, I hit a brick wall. Depression, anxiety. I went into therapy, and then I studied to be a psychotherapist. Didn't finish, but I studied that journey, sat with clients, loved it, right? And so here I am now. I'm in a Thames Valley Chamber role, and I'm kind of caretaking, looking at what businesses are doing, okay, looking at what's working. And I love to hear what works, and I love to hear what doesn't work. And in your story, one of the things that, I mean, two parts to what you were saying. Before we started the recording, we were talking about mental health, first aiding, and reducing the stigma, and why organizations kind of weren't treating mental health in parity with physical health, that kind of thing. And then in your story, what I love to hear was kind of what came to you in your therapy, right? Like, and I can only imagine, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but just from my own experience of therapy, and that journey with the client, that space to let things unfold, to make the connections with childhood. And, suddenly these things which kind of floor us, we take back to earlier things, and suddenly we're making sense, and we're less hidden to ourselves. But moving on from that, because I don't want to give to the audience another story of that, although perhaps that's for another webinar. Looking at what organizations are doing, I always keep one eye open on, okay, so we've got teams of MHFAs going on. We've got, various campaigns, whether it's Lloyd's Group doing This Is Me campaign, or Johnson & Johnson doing Healthy Minds, or, Bupa will do Wellness Action, all these big organizations doing these initiatives. What I'm really keen on unearthing is, okay, but where's the evidence that it's working? Where's the evidence? I mean, Lisa, you kind of suggested that we're still going in the wrong direction. Absolutely. It's not working. Whatever we're doing is not working. Presenteeism and absenteeism, it's I mean, this is broad stroke stuff, but it's not working. But I bet you in Jim's organization, right, Jim is working, because Jim will have a sensor out for anyone who's experiencing this, right? Jim, when he's managing, and I know I'm putting words in your mouth, Jim, but being from a commercial background myself, I'm envious of what you do. But as you look across your teams, and as you're driving this growth in this high risk, edgy kind of pipeline development stuff, I bet you are aware, and people who work with you are in your middle management roles are aware, to be able to hear, notice, listen, feel if something's not quite right. Now, just to add to that as well, I'm monologuing a bit, but just to add, right, my confession. So, it's the past 17 years for me that I've been, dealing with my depression, right? I call it my depression. And when I look at the organizations that I've worked with, which are probably about 6 organizations over that period of time, there's not one organization, including my current one, that I feel comfortable talking about what I experience, right? And it boils down to something that I am guessing you probably are fostering in your organization, and that's trust. Because awareness, in my experience and in talking with organization, it all comes down to the individual. Some individuals, for an awareness of it, and being able to just speak in the coffee room or speak one-to-one with someone, that kind of helps them through that experience, and that's wonderful. And reducing the stigma and more awareness is brilliant. But for someone like me, I need about 50 hoops jump through before I can share I'm really struggling today. That's all I would probably need to say to someone who understood, right? Why can't I say that? It's because even if I think they understand, I don't think that they will forgive me. And what I mean by that is, I think that, and this is where trust comes in. I think that there's still very much a big culture of, well, as long as you do your job, Dave, I will give you the sympathy, but you better do your job. At the bottom line, the results are compassionately listen to you, but at the end of the day, it's job first done, please. While we then sympathize about what you're going through, which is very different from what you experienced and I experienced in therapy. And unless you've experienced it, from what I see, and some leaders have, and some middle managers have, there isn't the capacity to forgive and be nimble and to move on with that person without walking on eggshells. And I don't want to walk on eggshells. Amantha and Lisa, you'll know Stuart well. Sorry to put another person in the room. You know, Stuart doesn't walk on eggshells. He said this is what he struggles with. Jim, you don't walk on eggshells. You're very open with what you struggle with, and people can. You obviously feel that people can respect you and let you get on with your job. That's what I want, but I don't. And so my focus is also on looking at organizations and, you know, apart from all the signposting and reducing stigma and awareness, where's the trust element built into the leadership element, and how does that kind of, you know, how it, because that's how the culture is changed. And that's me end of monologuing, but that's my take on it, and my challenge to any organization with all these wonderful initiatives.
David, that was really powerful hearing that. And I would love to ask you, what would you need to be experiencing for you to feel that trust? Because I bet there'll be some people who listen to this who have worked in some of the organizations you've been part of who will be saying, of course you can trust us. Of course we have a trusting culture here. And, you know, people will be talking about, we do that, but you haven't experienced that. And of course it's our perceptions, our own unique understanding of what's going on around us. That is what's important. So do you have advice, if you could be advising the people within a current organization or others about what it is you actually need for you to be able to feel confident saying those words, I'm struggling, what would that be?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I think it's about feeling like someone's, and this is kind of macro, feeling like someone's got your back, and feeling as though you really do trust them. Like, you know, when you feel someone's got your back, when you're having a bad day, they just allow for that, and it doesn't cloud their opinion of you or what they still know you're capable of. Right? There's that unwritten, okay, give this guy a break. And I think that I've got your back, being an introvert and being very observant and stuff, I guess I pick up my cues from talking about other things, right? And, you know, I'll kind of, you know, start being related about the person, and I will judge, okay, how far does this go? And then I watch that person in relationship with other people in the team, and I see how I see whether they really listen to that person. And so these are the hoops that I suppose I put everyone through in my circle of friends. You know, are they really listening to me? Are they really giving me the feeling that actually I'm safe to share this? And because I will share, but I'll share it in bite-sized portions to see how they handle it. And if they handle that with the acceptance and compassion and all these lovely words, and understanding, I'll then share a little bit more. If they don't, if I get the stiff upper lip, or, well, no, we really need to just push through this because I need the best from you right now, right? Knowing that I'm going to deliver my best, but if you could understand when I'm not feeling that way, boy, I could be even better for you, right? You know, we could be tight, and we could do, you know, workplace culture, and man, we could transform this place. We'd all work together, you know, all this stuff. So I think it is about, drawing it down, answer your question, is about that relationship. It comes down to the quality of relationship. If I worked for Jim, right, I'm just surmising, boy, I would know Jim would understand. If I say, Jim, I'm having a hell of a day, Jim would say, Dave, I'm sure, take what you need. Let's do this another time. He would, and we would do it another time. And that what Jim has given me, I'll be like, Jim's got my back. Great. Now I'm feeling great today, Jim. Can we, you know, it's about that relationship and trust.
But isn't it also the case that people are their own worst enemies because they need to let go as well? You know, if somebody goes into a situation in a workplace setting with their to-do list center stage, and they're having a bad day, they don't let go of the to-do list. They carry on having a bad day.
Yeah.
And realistically, they need to be able to give themselves permission to cut loose from the to-do list. What they're looking for is for somebody else to cut them loose from the to-do list. And that's part of the journey. If you're working with colleagues who say, look, you don't need to sweat this, don't sweat it, just come back to this tomorrow or next week or whatever, look after yourself. Yeah, you know.
And that's so interesting, because from both of your perspectives, so I mean, the thing that Lisa and I often say about is we'll come from a different perspective, and what I heard, that the bridging word between both of your experience there is rapport, because we know that trust has to be earned. You know, we, like David's saying, David's got his mechanisms for determining, can I trust this person, or can I be really open? And it comes back down to those compassionate conversations, doesn't it? It comes back down to actually, I was on a call with a client this morning. He said to me, sorry, I'm late, but I actually welcomed a new employee in this morning. I went, brilliant, how lovely. And he said, yeah, wasn't what everyone else wanted to do, though. He said, basically, they wanted to meet her at lunchtime. He said, my concern was if I didn't create the right tone with her, we might not have that employee by the end of today. He said, it really matters how we bring people in. And so that whole rapport, building rapport. And I was almost going to reach for my model, which I've now got, because really what we're talking about with the brain is our threat center. Our threat center is far superior to anything words can convey. So we all operate from a place of feeling. If you get a good feeling about someone, you get a bad feeling about someone. A good feeling about a situation, a bad feeling about a situation. That's what we're all responding to. So are we prepping? Are we creating work as an environment where people are gonna, I use the word loosely, and I don't mean it to be loaded, fail? That's managers failing. That's employees feeling like they're failing, because we don't invest enough in getting to know people, welcoming them, dialing down that whole threat experience for them, and dialing up that whole rapport experience, which is, do you know what? I really feel like I know David. And I know, David, there's been times where you've messaged me, or I've messaged you, or I've messaged Lisa, because you just know people well enough. By the way, Jim, do you know, we've never met each other in real life. I've only met these two through a screen. So it is possible to understand people to a certain level, but it's no substitute for walking down to the foyer and meeting someone at the door and go, welcome, really looking forward to you, it's your first day type thing, setting the tone.
Totally. Yeah.
And what you both, Jim and David, you both said is about that space to make the connections, either making the connections for yourself between what you're experiencing and what's gone before, but whether we're talking about connections with each other and rapport, or connections with how I'm feeling, what's going on in my workplace with my colleagues, it all comes down to space. And the problem that exists in so many companies now, I was having a conversation with a legal company this morning who was saying they need to do something radical about well-being in their organization, because there's been so much change, it's all going out the window. And we're thinking about bringing in and having this kind of blanket training for everybody and doing this stuff. And it's like, actually just put the brakes on, just have good conversations. Don't bring in another layer of something that's going to be another layer of, we're doing this to you, and it's another layer of complexity and something else to take on. It's almost hit pause and just take a step back and just have really good conversations and create this space to get to know each other and get to know what feeling good means for me, what performing well means for me, what actually a good day at work feels like for me. Is it just getting to the end of it and going home, or is it I've met with a certain number of my colleagues, or what is it I want to get from work? And when we understand that and we can communicate that with the people around us, we begin to build that rapport and those relationships and that trust with each other, and we understand what motivates each other, and we get to know then when people aren't having a good day, we notice those signs more, that someone is struggling, and perhaps we might say to them, you don't look your usual self, what's going on, rather than relying on them to speak up and say, I'm struggling. But the space bit is the really key bit for me that we just need to create more of.
Can I Jim question.
Certainly.
All right, so with your team and with your experience, before and after, kind of going through your, experience with depression, what do you do differently now with your people that you notice makes a difference to the, whether you call it workplace well-being culture, positive workplace well-being culture, whatever? What do you do? Yeah, if you can say something about that.
I think whatever term you put on it, I think mental health has to be center stage. So, you've all got to be feeling good. And one of the analogies is, in businesses is all these TV shows about buying property in nice places. I mean, it's all location, and people who buy property quite quickly realize it's not the location, it's the people that's important. You end up with good neighbors or bad neighbors, and it makes your life amazing or horrible. And it's got nothing to do with, the single glazing or the pebble dash it's actually down to the people. And it's the difference between a startup environment, which I love, and an up and running environment, is that the startup is all about building and creating. So you have that freedom to create the thing you want. And if you end up with a bad result, you built a bad business, then that's bad on typically a couple of levels. One, it might just not be able to make money. So that's the economic side of it. But you might have built a kind of mishmash of getting the wrong people in who don't get on together. And then you don't get that trust. You don't get that rapport. You don't get all pulling together, looking after each other and catching each other when you fall over. And that's when you go into that consciously, like, you can build environments that do that. So you're looking for people that work well together. And you encourage from the get-go that forum of we can be good with each other, we can look after each other, and we understand that there are certain things that trump everything else, and you shouldn't make it difficult, whatever level it is, and go into an up and running environment, perhaps like that legal firm you were talking about just now, Lisa, where the playbooks have been written over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And so there is a way of doing something. So when a colleague, so one of the classic examples, you've got somebody who suddenly gets a call that their child's sick, and what do? They've got a report they've got to finish. They've got a meeting they've got to get to. They've got to possibly drive 20 miles through the rain. They've got, freak out. Now, a kind company just says unequivocally, go. And an up and running business probably won't. You'll be jumping through a lot of hoops to do it, and you won't have the support of the people around you to sort that stuff, because they all know that they're reinventing the rule book to support you. And it's a much bigger reverse engineered sort of cultural change to change that thing around. But it still comes back down to the people, and I think the ongoing recruitment and training is where it happens and where it starts to make a difference. But I find it much easier to build something rather than to change something.
So when you're in that startup mode, Jim, and you've got these frenetic geniuses around you who are like going at 150 miles an hour because it's startup mode, right? And it's all about getting those initial results going. If one of those trailblazers is kind of, doing great work, but slams up against a brick wall of, say, there's a loss, someone personal to them, and grief hits them, and then they go into a deep, dark depression, right? I'm curious that how you would have responded before your experience and how you would respond now. And because And let me just contextualize this slightly, all right? Just to complicate it further, right? There's part of me really sympathetic to an organization that just has to get the job done. Bottom line, has to do it. And mental health has no place in the workplace. I hear myself say that, and I know I'm guilty saying, but I also understand that dynamic of you have to get results, or there's no business to be kind in, right? Like there is that interplay. So I'm curious for yourself, if you don't mind me asking, what would be the difference now facing that scenario with that hot guy?
Yeah, well, I don't think I went through a particularly radical change as a human being. I learned a lot, so I think now I'd have more vocabulary. I'd be able to nuance it much better. Whereas I think the younger me was potentially also so. I mean, if I go back to one of my earlier businesses, which was a digital health tech business, and that was sort of very much that working every hour that's sent to you, and 24/7, 365, and everybody does it. And one of our founding team was reeling from the loss of her husband, who had taken his own life, and in most business environments that would have meant she couldn't be a founder member of this business, but we embraced that as a way of giving her a safe space where she could start to function again. And I think that's because the people that, like me, who'd started this business together, because there were like 3 founders, and then the team that we built was 6 in total. So we for day one of the business were, if I look back, I think compassionate, and it's difficult to teach that kind of thing. And I guess to a certain extent, I probably had that anyway. I think I'm compassionate with myself, which enabled me to go on the journey that I was going on. But to answer your question, I think I might have made more mistakes in old Jim and not known how to put it into words in old Jim. But I think fundamentally I was still of that sort of persuasion. And I think one of the oddest things about human existence is that you end up with all the experience you need to do well in life at the end of your life, rather than at the beginning of your life. And you should know all this stuff when you're 20. But so
can I ask then? So, addressing now all the old Jims who are out there, and the people who maybe aren't so naturally compassionate, what would be your advice to them in terms of supporting and looking out for people who they're working with? So perhaps people that they're managing, or just their colleagues, or anyone that they're sort of in contact with. What would be your advice about trying to make that experience for them as good as it can be, if actually that compassion isn't just part of who they are anyway?
I think empathy. I think you can teach empathy, and I mean, you've got to think yourself into the other person's shoes. That this person's going through hell at the moment, and if you can't think like them and understand it from their perspective, you'll never be able to deal with them sensibly. And I think that is absolutely fundamental. And sometimes it can be quite difficult in a startup environment, because you tend to have, at the very early stage, people who are multitasking like crazy, because they're not all masters of everything or geniuses at everything. And there aren't enough people around to cover everything off. But you do tend to get to that point where each person's a silo. So you're in your own little space doing your thing. And it's quite difficult to do empathy in that, because you don't really understand what's going on in that person's brain, what their particular stresses and strains are. But I do think that, the sort of do unto yourself as you would be done by, or do unto others as you would be, whatever. Excuse me, I'm misquoting like crazy now. Is the role that I would like to see acted upon by everybody in a working environment. I mean, it's what we do at home, hopefully. When one of your children horrible to another one of your children, you stop them and say, "What do you think that feels like?" It's so easy and natural when it's your own family to be nurturing like that and training people, and we should do it in the workplace too.
And isn't that isn't that our biggest hurdle? Because you only know what you know. whatever the last training course you went on, whatever the last conversation you assimilated, because we don't formally put people through management training or leadership training. You're literally coming with a whole load of life experience. And if your experience has been that you've been spoken to in a certain way, dealt in a certain way, I always say with that saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes doesn't really cut it for me. It's almost like you've got to walk a mile in someone else's shoes in the way that they walk, not how you would walk. And I had a client this week who deals in insolvency. They've never been busier, sadly. And that's the first thing that this person said to me. And he talked about a client, and he said, I'm just feeling so frustrated. And that frustratedness was turning to stress, lack of sleep. So this individual was really struggling with that. But because this person hasn't been trained, they didn't understand how to sit in perceptually in someone else's shoes. So actually, do we need to train our managers to understand what perceptiveness is like? How can you perceive someone else's situation? Because you may not have experienced it yourself. I find this in my menopause work. Young managers have no idea what it's like to be a 50-something, spinning so many plates, juggling so many balls. How would they? But actually, if you teach people how to sit in someone else's shoes, to be an impartial bystander who looks at all the behavior and says, how would that all stack up? Those reflection points are like absolute diamonds for people. And we did have a bit of a laugh because my client said, do I have to wear a dress to be my client? Because they were, and I said, well, it's optional. If it helps in character, obviously go for it. But the reality was that person took huge learnings from that we're in a safe place with someone who was, encouraging that vulnerability to go, well, what do you think it would feel like? And actually what came out of it was, I wish I could, document it more publicly, but what came out was a great action plan, going back to the client, actually saying, look, I think we could have done more. Whereas at the beginning of any conversation, we're quite resentful or we're quite defensive. And that just keeps those patterns of behaviours going, doesn't it? So that the next time someone says, Amantha, I've got a problem, people are already running into, right, I'm on attack mode here, or I'm now going to make it very clear to them, I need that job done, whatever you're feeling. We're not even going to get into that because I know where that takes us. I need that from you. And so maybe we're doing a massive disservice to people. I myself was dropped in a management role that I was unprepared for in the pharmaceutical industry. I was a great salesperson. I was not prepped to be a great manager, which is why I stepped away from that role. And I think that's such a shame, because knowing what I know now, like you said, Jim, bit of self-praise here, I think I'd be great at that because I've learned from those experiences. So how do we, we've all said we're not doing enough. The trajectory on this is not in the place that we want it to be. If we had to think of some solutions that we could actively get behind as 4 people who understand how powerful this is, what actions would we want to get behind that we really think, actually, if we were waving a banner for, we could make a difference with from this starting point?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I don't know if I've got a universal panacea for that. I mean, certainly in startup land, like the situation in which I met the company that I'm now working with, I was doing a lot of mentoring, and at early stage businesses, at a very early stage, are usually extremely enthusiastic bunnies jumping up and down with a fantastic idea and no real knowledge about whether it's actually going to work. And so it's all that kind of, jumping across the chasm, and people who are starting businesses like that are like natural born salespeople, because they are so enthusiastic. They win deals because people they find the enthusiasm magnetic, and they want to be on that journey with you and so on. And they might have had no formal training in the actual sales process. That once it becomes more structural, becomes more difficult, then I think, okay, what's the missing bit? There's the training, really. So it's a good insight into what else is going to come down the track with them. They're going to probably be doing that thing where they're logging out at 1 o'clock in the morning and not getting enough sleep, and then catching a flight the next day, and you do that day in, day out, and slowly but surely things go fut. Your family goes fut, your health goes fut, relationships go but, and all you're doing is trying to get this business to a successful point. So the learning that I've been there, I've done that myself, and I've watched colleagues do that. And now, back in those days, it was people would say, "What you mean? I mean, you're logging out at 9 o'clock in the evening. I'm staying online until 1 o'clock. You know, whatever." There might be a sense of that going on, but now I will say to anybody at that very early stage, look, do not make your bedroom a boardroom. Do not stay up late on emails and stuff, because the bar is where you put it, and if you put that bar at that point, you'll never get it lower again. So put the bar at, family time, not working weekends, doing whatever these things are, and you will be just as successful. You've got to make your own luck. You've got to remember the exceptions to those rules. When that phone call comes in that is going to be the multi-million-dollar deal, and it happens to be at 9:30 when you're watching your favorite TV show, you should probably answer it. But they should be exceptions rather than the rule. And I find that people who genuinely manage to achieve that from the get-go are happier and better as a result. And interestingly, that's a construction company that I was running with a good friend of mine. I'd sold my last digital health tech business, and I just kind of had it with software. So I just wanted to be hands-on, creative, mucking around in the dirt and enjoy myself. And when we went into business together, the two of us, I said, "That's my part. There's one ground rule here, and that is that this has got to be fun. And if it's not fun, we've got to do what it takes to make it fun again, and we've got to stop. I'm not going to be chaining myself to a grindstone here." And he thankfully said, "Totally agree with that," and that became the rule. So actually, when I got into my depressed state and was going into therapy, one of the things I learned about therapy was that the trigger for me was going to be continually having to deal with the admin in a back office, disconnected from other people, and I should not be doing that kind of thing now, because I couldn't very well wander around building sites with only one eye safely, and somebody needed to do that work. I knew somebody else needed to do that work, so I backed out of that business and went back into the world of early stage high tech businesses, which it's probably something I wouldn't have done if I hadn't had all those experiences and learnings to enable myself to tell myself that. And I shudder to think I probably would have just carried on getting more and more and more depressed and until something awful happened. But
I hope people listening to you explain that so well, Jim, means that people will have that wake up call earlier. Maybe it'll help prompt people to think, am I doing the thing that is fun? Am I enjoying what I do? Because it's such an important part, isn't it? Actually feeling happy and a sense of enjoyment from your work, that feeds good mental health. And how many people are stuck in jobs that they really despise? They just do it because it's a job. So I love that rule, golden rule. We should all have that.
One business that I worked in, fantastic account manager, brilliant, really, really worked well in the team. Everyone loved this guy, really, really good, right? New manager comes in, performance appraises him a little bit early, puts him on warning, and he gets signed off. He's anxious, his blood, all this health problems. Cut long story short, we lose the guy, right? And because of the culture of the organization and the leadership and the reflection and how they perceive that, still the story in that organization is, oh well, it was his problem, right? Now, the accounts that we say lost or didn't maintain because of that, and the fallout, the business cost, everything else, why are we protecting the leadership who can't quite understand as simple that everyone in the organization knows, but bar that top leadership, that intelligence to be able to, it's part emotional intelligence, the empathy and compassion and building trust. it's also part of taking ownership on the effect of, okay, what are the decisions that we're making, that we're pushing through the pipeline, but then we don't listen. Listening, Stuart will always say, right, Lisa, the ability to be able to listen to your people, to listen to one another, that is often the oil which when we're looking at what works and what doesn't work with mental health, you get different organizations trying different things. At the moment, it's very crowded, whether that's MHFA stuff, whether it's, a particular implementation of something. If you've got the compassion and the ability to listen, you can probably improve things, right? You really can.
We have to wrap up because we could carry on having this conversation for at least another hour. I know there's so much more to be said, but I'm conscious of time. My advice would be for people to listen to, once they've listened to this conversation, actually to get other people within their teams to listen to this conversation that we're having today, and just to see what resonates with people and what kind of what prompts people to think slightly differently about their own practice, their own way of doing things. I'd also obviously get people to suggest that they download the resource. So the resource that goes with this, which is all about anxiety and depression, is full of lots of interesting ideas and strategies and advice around how to think about it differently at an individual level and working with teams. So it's really practical. That's part of what Amantha and I are focusing on through the Resilience Collective. So download that, read it, again, discuss it as a team. I think the value of all of this, I think that's what's come out today, is the value of conversation. So when people sit down and talk about what resonates for them, what is it that they think, they want to focus on in terms of doing something differently for themselves or for other people, or they want something different from other people for themselves. So just beginning to have conversations around, the ideas we've talked about today, the ideas that are in the resource that people can download. Amantha, I'm going to hand over to you. Do you want to finish us off in terms of the Resilience Collective following us on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so we, first of all, thank you so much for giving your time. We can't do these conversations without generous people like David and Jim, so thank you so much for your time. And so what we would like to do is we'll put your details, if you're happy, you're both on LinkedIn, I would imagine. We'll put those details in the show notes so people can be in touch with you. But if everybody, including our guests, would like to follow the hashtag The Resilience Collective, you'll find our stuff on LinkedIn, but you'll get this podcast either by sound, video. The resource will be available. We will post those. To remind people, there's already one resource already available, which is the stress episode, which was our first one. So people can collect these. And we've put a lot of time. We've taken the legwork out so that you don't have to do it. And they're all clickable links, all referenced. And these would be great things to use as well-being training yourself or workshops or getting in touch with Lisa or I. So we will be putting this out. And obviously, if people would like to be in touch with either Jim or David, we would really encourage them to do that because they have so much more value to give. Lisa, have I missed anything out?
I don't think so, other than to say, again, thank you so much, Jim and David, for joining us today. Really grateful.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Good to meet you all.